This webinar is part of our online series, CPPR webinar series. I would like to extend a warm welcome to our distinguished speakers and all present here. Center for Public Policy Research is an independent public policy think tank based out in Cochin since 2004. We work in the focus areas of city, infrastructure, livelihood, education, health, governance, election system, international relations, defense and security. This talk is hosted by Center for Public Policy Research Center for Strategic Studies, which deals with areas broadly encompassing international relations, India's foreign policy, defense and security. It is a great privilege for CPPR to have with us Professor Jayadeva Uyangoda and Dr. S.Y. Surender Kumar. Professor Uyangoda retired from University of Colombo in 2016 as a senior professor of political science. In 2016, he joined New Delhi Center for Study of Developing Societies as Rajni Kothari Chair in Democracy. Emeritus Professor of Political Science, University of Colombo, Professor Uyangoda is a political scientist and a constitutional expert in Sri Lanka. He is a prolific writer and whose works are widely used as key texts in the field of political science and the social sciences in Sri Lanka. He has actively taken part in Sri Lanka's constitution building efforts and peace process of the late 1990s. Welcome to you, sir.
Thank you.
And we have with us Dr. Kumar. He is Associate Professor, Department of Political Science, Bangalore University. Dr. Kumar has an MPhil and PhD degrees from South Asian Studies, School of International Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. Dr. Kumar is author of a number of articles and papers. Dr. Kumar has been awarded Mahbubul Haq Research Award on non-traditional security issues in South Asia. Welcome to you, sir, too.
Thank you very much.
Before moving forward with the discussion proceedings, I request all the participants to mute their systems and notify us through the chat box in case you have questions. Follow the discussion live on Facebook page, CPPR Facebook page, and follow the live tweets with hashtag CPPR webinar. I now request Professor Uyangoda for his introductory remarks.
Well, I want to begin by thanking the CPPR for organizing this webinar and inviting me to be one of the speakers. Let me begin by saying that Sri Lanka has entered a phase of political change as well as political uncertainty. Because political change invariably brings about uncertainty of the future as well. We have a new government with a new president and a new parliament. The new president was elected in November last year and the new parliament just a few weeks ago. The ruling party, which is a new political entity called Sri Lanka Podujana Peramuna or Sri Lanka People's Party, which has been led by former President Mr. Mahinda Rajapaksa. This ruling party has a near 2/3 majority in parliament. And we also have at the moment a relatively weak opposition, which has been, of course, the trend for many years in Sri Lanka. Whenever we have a strong parliamentary party with a strong majority, there's always a weak opposition. One of the key features of the current political equation is that the two traditional political parties which have dominated the electoral politics as well as the structures of governance for since the 1950s are no longer major players in the political process. The new ruling party, that SLPPE, is a breakaway party from the SLFP, which was formed only a few years ago by former President Mahinda Rajapaksa and his family. It's basically a family-centric party. Nevertheless, it has a very wide popular support, primarily within the Sinhalese society. The Sri Lanka Freedom Party, to which President Rajapaksa and most of his followers belonged to earlier, has become a very small party in the current parliament, which has been actually absorbed into the SLPP. And the other main party, the United National Party, which has been, in power for many, many years, and it was a party that was formed in 1947. Quite interestingly, it does not have a single member of parliament at the moment. It was entitled to one seat in parliament, not from a constituency, but from the national list. But because of the internal disputes, they have not been able to even nominate that single member of parliament. So this, connected with the demise, or not really the demise, the unexpected decline of the two main traditional parties, Sri Lanka's party system, political party system, seems to be undergoing a kind of a radical transformation. Until, say, last year, we had a dominant two-party system along with a large number of small parties. So Sri Lanka's political party system can be described, at least we described Sri Lanka's political party system until the parliamentary election this year as a multi-party system with a dominant two-party system. Now, of course, that character of the Sri Lanka's party system has changed radically. And either we might continue the dominant two-party system with two new parties, or we might move towards a dominant one-party system. That's also a likelihood. Then the second key feature of the current political situation in Sri Lanka is in the process of a political transition towards a post-democratic, a post-liberal political and constitutional order. Actually, the new government came into power with the promise of forming a strong government under a strong leader. And also they promised constitutional reforms in order to facilitate for such a new constitutional and political system. So a few days ago, the government unveiled its plan for an amendment to the Constitution by abolishing the 19th Amendment to the Constitution, and that's called the 20th Amendment. And the 20th Amendment, as proposed, envisages a replacement of the existing parliamentary model with a new presidential system in which the president will become the center of state power with untrammeled and unrestricted executive powers, who would stand above the legislature, above the cabinet, and even above the judiciary. So we have a very interesting, possibility of a fairly unknown model of a post-democratic political transition. So Sri Lanka has a radically new, political landscape. Sri Lanka has been known for, sustaining its democratic institutions, democratic practices, parliamentary democracy, representative democracy, despite setbacks, despite political violence, civil wars, and many challenges to the democratic political system. But for about 7 or 8 decades, Sri Lanka's parliamentary democracy survived all these setbacks. But it looks like the Sri Lanka's democratic system now is facing a transformation which goes beyond the framework of parliamentary representative democracy as it has been known to us. Then there is also a fairly serious economic crisis in Sri Lanka, in addition to what one may call evolving political crisis. The economic crisis is not new. It has been actually building up for the past several years. Even the 2015 regime change took place in a context of a severe economic crisis. And the key feature of Sri Lanka's economic crisis over the past decade or so has been its sharpening debt crisis. And the debt crisis at the moment is so severe that there were figures recently, the data, to suggest that nearly 83% of Sri Lanka's GDP, the debt, public debt constitutes nearly 83% of Sri Lanka's GDP. But some people argue that even it can be even 100%. So we have this very severe debt crisis. And that has been now aggravated by the corona pandemic. And the economic crisis created by the corona pandemic is not only a domestic national economic crisis, it's a part of a regional crisis. We know that Indian economy is in serious trouble at the moment in the context of the corona pandemic. And the global economy is also in serious trouble. So Sri Lanka's economy has been closely integrated with the world economy and the world market and the export economy. So Sri Lanka will have a very, very difficult time to come out of this crisis. So we can envisage a situation where until about 2022 the government will be compelled to cope with and combat this economic crisis, the future trajectories of which are not yet very clear. And the loss of employment, the severe foreign exchange shortages, and also inability of the economy to generate new employment, and the rising cost of living, and all these things will add to what one may call a social crisis. And Sri Lanka of a what one may call a triple crisis: economic crisis, which will lead to a social dislocation, social crisis. In the United States, we know that already the corona pandemic has created a severe social dislocational crisis, and we can expect this in other countries as well. United States is not an exception. Sri Lanka will not be an exception. And then what is likely to happen is that the combination of this economic crisis and the social crisis might generate a political crisis. Because the government's plan at the moment is to consolidate its power and to replace the system of democratic governance with a system where there is a heavy and excessive concentration of power in the hands of one branch of the state, which is the executive. So that might create some degree of political instability. And my own feeling is that I hope I will be proved wrong. This combination of these three crises, this triple crisis, economic, social, and political, would perhaps determine the political trajectories of Sri Lanka for the year 2021. I think I will, for the moment, stop there. Maybe I can come back to the discussion once other presentations are also made. So, if you like, I would like to respond to a few questions.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for these insightful remarks and for setting the tone of the webinar. Moving forward, I now request Dr. Kumar for his introductory remarks. Dr. Kumar? Hello? Dr. Kumar?
Yes, yes.
Yes, please.
Okay. Yeah. Shall I go ahead? Okay.
Yes, please.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Firstly, I would like to thank the Center for Public Policy Research for giving me an opportunity to be part of this panel discussion in which we have the renowned international speaker and a Sri Lankan scholar, Professor Jayadev Vengoda. It's nice to see sir once again. And now basically in this 10 minutes introductory remarks, I'm going to focus on three aspects or 3 points which I'm going to emphasize on. The first one is that the historic victory of Mahinda Rajapaksa is a party coming to power on a very massive or 2/3 majority is not going to alter the India-Sri Lanka relation. That is the first point I would like to emphasize. Second point I'm going to stress on is that presently the Indian government is is at a disadvantageous position vis-a-vis in terms of persuading the Sri Lankan government in terms of getting the Indian concerns or Indian interest being addressed by the Sri Lankan government. And the third point I would like to be emphasizing on is that there is a greater scope for India and Sri Lanka to improve their ties in terms of, for example, the Indian Ocean region where there can be a greater cooperation. Regional cooperation is also there. At the same time, countering Islamic terrorism and also a couple of economic issues. So these are the 3 points on which I'll try to cover within the stipulated of 10 minutes. So as I said, first thing that the victory of Mahinda Rajapaksa, a landslide victory which we call, or a stunning victory which we call, or many of us had believed that it is not going to be much easy in terms of getting 2/3, but he has got the 2/3. That is very significant turn in the Sri Lankan politics. So basically we feel that, personally I feel that this is not going to alter the India-Sri Lanka relation, because already the Indian government has been making efforts to engage with the new regime. Similarly, the Sri Lankan regime has also been trying to engage with the Indian government. So we could see when the 2019 presidential election happened and the Gotabaya Rajapaksa becoming president, Modi was the first one to congratulate Gotabaya Rajapaksa's victory, which was followed by our Ministry of External Affairs Jaishankar visit to Colombo and inviting him to visit Delhi. Subsequently, we also see that when Mahinda Rajapaksa emerged victorious, I think Modi was the first, Narendra Modi, our Prime Minister, was the first global leader to congratulate Mahinda Rajapaksa, which was followed by Indian envoy to Sri Lanka's meeting with Mahinda Rajapaksa. So clearly all this demonstrates that both the regimes or leaders of both the countries want to engage with each other. At the same time, one of the important statements coming from Mahinda Rajapaksa and as well as the Gotabaya Rajapaksa has also been very conducive for Indian government to engage, in terms of Mahinda Rajapaksa saying that with India it is the relation and with others it is the friends, and Gotabaya Rajapaksa, the president, saying that he will follow the India first policy or approach. So this clearly articulates that both the countries' leaders are very keen on taking the relations forward. Then the second aspect is the economic ties. As we all know that India is the largest trading partner for Sri Lanka, and the free trade agreement has also enhanced the ties between both the countries. And India has been investing heavily, although not on par with the Chinese investment in Sri Lanka, but in terms of almost all the sector, whether it is telecommunication, whether it is banking sector, whether it is tourism sector or energy sector, India has been investing in the infrastructure projects. So a lot of economic activities are happening between both the countries. So that will keep the relations keep moving. Apart from this, India's humanitarian and development assistance, which has been given by India for decades together, is also one of the important benchmark which will build both the relation very strongly. So more than the humanitarian assistance, whether it is a man-made or a natural disaster, India has always been there in helping out Sri Lanka. And development assistance, as we all know that it is close to $3.5 billion US dollars worth India has given developmental assistance, of which 560 million has been in the form of grants. So in that way, the development and humanitarian assistance, development assistance in terms of capacity building, human resource development or housing projects, several other schemes. And although the India's development projects were mainly focused in the northeast, and now it is slowly shifting towards on the south. In that way, the relations between the countries will focus and will emerge. And that's what I'm trying to argue, that the emergence of Mahinda Rajapaksa as the charismatic leader and the Prime Minister of Sri Lanka at the present juncture is not going to alter much of India-Sri Lanka relations because of the, apart from the historical, cultural and the other aspect. Then the second thing is, the point I'm trying to argue is that the Indian government is in a weak position or a weak wicket in terms of persuading the Sri Lanka on three critical issues. Why is that? Because the first one is when it comes to the Tamil issues. So Indian government, all the successive governments have been very clear that they want the implementation of the 13th Amendment and then ethnic reconciliation, addressing the Tamil and the Muslims issues in the northeastern region. So this has been the India's request and demand, trying to persuade the Sri Lankan government from time to time. But India cannot put more pressure on the Sri Lankan government in the present gesture because of a couple of reasons. One is that the Indian government is not very proactive on they have been taking up this issue as and when the Sri Lankan delegates visit India, but nevertheless they have been not proactive because there's not much pressure from the Tamil political parties based in Tamil Nadu on the central government. Second thing is the Mahinda Rajapaksa and Gotabaya Rajapaksa's maximalist position, because they believe that what is required in north and east region of Sri Lanka is the economic development, bring about economic equality. That is important, not necessarily devolution of powers. And they always believe that they want their main focus is to bring about any solution in the framework of unitary framework. So this kind of the 2/3 majority, I think, so think direction. So India will not be. And the third important thing, we all know that with 2/3 majority and the Tamil National Alliance, which had, it has gradually declined in terms of MPs. It has only now 10 MPs, and most of the Tamil parties are fragmented. So their bargaining chip with the regime has been reduced, and many of the Tamil parties are now part of the alliance of SLPP. So that's where the India also cannot put much pressure. Second thing on the development which are happening within Sri Lanka, that is the domestic development, whether the constitutional change or Mahinda Rajapaksa pursuing the nationalist agenda. I think India cannot say much on that one, because India's revoking of Article 370, then implementation of Citizenship Amendment Act, all the things clearly has, India has a very right to do that one, because India is an independent and sovereign country. But at the same time, India had to spend a lot of time and energy in convincing the world that they had done it for the right purpose and other things. So at that time, the Sri Lanka said it is an internal matter, and they did not have any kind of criticism coming from Sri Lanka. So India also need to do the same thing, because whatever the development happens in Sri Lanka. So India is also in a different wicket, and now with the India-China border tension, where China is unilaterally trying to alter the line of actual control, and Nepal posing a new challenge. So India will not be in a position to take up any new challenges from Sri Lanka or address the issues. And the last important one is that we all know that the China and Pakistan, Sri Lanka's relation with China and Pakistan is gradually increasing, particularly with the China, with the BRI. It has given a great push for China's growing influence in Sri Lanka. Although New Delhi cannot request the Sri Lankan to completely cut off their ties with China and Pakistan, for the obvious reason that Sri Lanka is an independent and a sovereign country, has every right to pursue its policy with whichever country it wants. But nevertheless, India would only request is that ensure that the Colombo doesn't compromise on the Indian security interest when it's having its ties with China and Pakistan. So recent times we could see how Pakistan is engaging with Sri Lanka. The recent visit of the naval chief of Pakistan, then the Air Force chief to Pakistan visit to Colombo, and the military ties which are going on. So, but nevertheless, Sri Lankan government has assured through several statements that Indian interest will be taken care and other things. But this is the one concern where India cannot go on much. Coming to my last point, that there is greater scope for India and Sri Lanka to strengthen their ties, to take it to the next level on on economic issues. That is two issues. For example, that still the negotiations are going on, the economic and technology agreement. India is very much keen on pushing finishing this agreement. Sri Lanka has certain reservations on this because this agreement will go beyond the trade of goods. It will be in the surveys, it will be technical cooperation and other aspects. So in that context, India is very keen. If this agreement comes through, I think it will be a big boost for India, Sri Lanka's economic ties. But Sri Lanka also has a reservation. It's time for India and Sri Lanka to sit together, negotiate and compromise and come up with a win-win situation, because this agreement is going to really boost the country's ties. And the other important thing is that the memorandum of cooperation which was signed during the Maitripala Sirisena regime, that is the India, Japan and Sri Lanka's East Container Terminal project. I think that is also an important one which both the three countries are very keen. But with now Mahinda Rajapaksa's statement that they have not taken a final call on that one, gives a wrong signal for the Indian government, because this project comes through, it is going to benefit for all, but there is opposition to this project within Sri Lanka as a sellout to India and other things, so that has to be worked out. So this will really boost the India relation, Sri Lanka, if it comes through. And the other important thing is the Indian Ocean region. So India has a strategic interest in Indian Ocean region, because Indian Ocean is not just an ocean which is strategically important, it is important for trade, commerce and energy. It is also a lot of non-traditional security threats within that region. In that way, for India to achieve its strategic interest, Sri Lanka becomes one of the important actor in that one. And India and Sri Lanka both are working closer on the military, naval and other issues. And moreover, there are a lot of convergence between India and Sri Lanka in terms of the Indian Ocean region, because both the countries believe in freedom of sea and they have equal respect for the United Nations Convention on Law of the Sea. At the same time, both the countries have good relations with Australia, United States and the Japan, that is what we Quad. So in that context, I think both the countries can work together and really ensure that both the countries mutually benefit in safeguarding the interest. Although the China factor is there in the Indian Ocean region, which India cannot ignore, but at the same time, both the countries have more shared interest, so which is very much important in that context. So this focusing on Indian Ocean also would be a great boost for the ties. And apart from this, the last important point is that the countering of Islamic terrorism. So India as well as Sri Lanka are victim of Islamic terrorism, and the radical groups are increasing in both the countries. So addressing these issues is very important. Already India and Sri Lanka are cooperating with each other, and then intelligence sharing is happening. And recently India also allocated around $50 million for countering terrorism for Sri Lanka. So some kind of cooperation is happening. And the last important point is that both the countries are also in favor of regional cooperation. Now India looking beyond SAARC. We know why SAARC is not progressing. So India is looking beyond SAARC, and BIMSTEC is one regional groupings where India is very much keen in pushing that one, and Sri Lanka is part of this. Sri Lanka was supposed to host the 5th BIMSTEC summit, but now it is postponed to January. But nevertheless, it is a very important organization. Both the countries can cooperate in terms of various technical aspects and take the interest of both the countries. So finally, I conclude by saying that both the countries, it is in the interest of both the countries to take the ties very much forward. I'm pretty confident both the countries are working in that direction. So, and at the same time, there are concerns. I think both the countries can sit together and always negotiate, because India-Sri Lanka ties are very centuries old, and the strong cultural link and historical links will continue to boost. And now Buddhist diplomacy coming to factor also can help both the countries to address their concern. But there are serious factors which need to be addressed. But I feel that both the countries have better prospects even with the present regime in Sri Lanka. So thank you. This was my introductory remarks, and now any questions or clarification, I'm open for that.
Thank you, sir, for such an comprehensive and insightful introductory remarks. Now, Professor Uwangoda, coming back to the elections, the August 15 election results have shown Sri Lanka place their trust on Rajapaksa brothers once again. And the current government is considered as the most favorable and is trusted to take country out of economic crisis. How do you see the changing domestic political system in Sri Lanka? Although you already talked about it, but what are the political issues now, that new political issue that will be there, and what is the future of Tamil political parties in Sri Lanka after this?
Well, I think your question has two components. The first one is about the political challenges of the regime, new regime. The second is about the Tamil politics. You see, the government government's immediate challenge is to consolidate its power. So although they have the presidency and also the parliament, still, they want to have a new constitution. Because the president, Rajapaksa, thinks that the constitution under the 19th Amendment is not adequate for him to, confront all the challenges that are, in front of him. Actually, if you look at the 19th Amendment, under the 19th Amendment, the president is not a very powerful institution. The presidency is in a way secondary to the office of the prime minister under the 19th Amendment. You see, all the presidential candidates in the November election last year, even the UNP candidate knew very well that the president elected under the 19th Amendment does not have the kind of authority that existed under the original 1978 Constitution or under the 18th Amendment or even under the 19th Amendment during its first phase. The current president constitutionally does not have powers, even those that President Maithripala Sirisena had when he was in power, because of the transitional provisions that are there in the 19th Amendment. So, even Mr. Sajith Premadas was elected in November last year, he would have had constitutional amendments to strengthen the powers and the powers of and authority of the president. So I think the first priority in terms of consolidation of power for the current president is to have a constitutional amendment that will give more powers to the president and once again make the president center of the state structure. So that can also create some discomforts within the ruling party, because currently the prime minister is President Gotabaya Rajapaksa's older brother, Mr. Mahinda Rajapaksa, who was the president from 2005 to 2014, 9 years, nearly 10 years. So there has to be a very interesting, compromise within the family, within the two brothers. For one brother, that the prime minister, who has under the 19th Amendment quite a lot of powers, and very similar to the Prime Minister of India, or the Prime Minister under the old Westministerial system of government. So the one brother will have to give up the powers constitutionally available to him as the Prime Minister to the other brother, who is the president. So it will be very interesting to see within the ruling family how these negotiations will take place. And at the same time, within the ruling party, how would the new configuration of powers between the president and parliament on one hand, and the president and the cabinet on the other hand would be negotiated. For example, in the 20th Amendment draft that has been unveiled only a few days ago, the president is not only the center of state power, not only the central institution of state power. You say the president's powers are above the powers of parliament and the cabinet, and there's no checks and balances whatsoever. So our two-thirds members of the Sri Lanka Podujana Peramuna willing to vote for a constitutional amendment that will render the legislature or parliament a mere rubber stamp of a very powerful executive presidency. Will those politicians who are in the
Hello. I think we have lost the connection. Hello. We can move forward with the discussion. Dr. Kumar, coming back to the Rajapaksa brothers, The victory of Rajapaksa, both in the presidential as well as the parliamentary elections, no doubt it has led concerns in New Delhi. And we have seen the ruling party continues to lean towards, I won't say heavily, but towards China, because many of the major infrastructural projects have begun during the Mahinda Rajapaksa's presidential term. So how do you see Rajapaksa brothers' relation with India unfolding from here on?
Okay. Well, thank you for the question, and I think the China factor will continue to be debated and discussed as and when we talk about India-Sri Lanka relation. So it's very well-known fact that when Mahinda Rajapaksa was in power, 2005 to 2014, so there was an argument among the policymakers and the academicians that somewhere down the line Sri Lanka was tilting toward China. That was also an opinion assumed in many of the Indian establishment. So it appears that now with Mahinda Rajapaksa coming to power, again this might increase or something. But nevertheless, the factor is that the obvious reason is that China has invested heavily and BRI is given a big boost for them. And China is playing a very important role because if you see the credit the Sri Lanka owns to China is close to 12%. Although many people say that even the Mahinda Rajapaksa in the latest interview has said it is just 12%. But what we own to the external agencies are 18%, and with Japan it is again 12%. And moreover, the China into 2019, China was the largest creditor along with Asian Development Bank to Sri Lanka. So even during the pandemic also we could see in the April 2020, Chinese government has given around 500 million US dollars to Sri Lanka, and another 500 million US dollars is supposed to be given to Sri Lanka. So China has always been forthcoming in terms of providing credits to Sri Lanka in that context. Apart from the investing in various several projects and the Hambantota being port also being leased out. So the point I'm trying to say is that even during the Maitripala Sirisena, although initially they campaigned that they are going to cancel the Hambantota port being handed over to China and other things, but when they came back to power, there was a smooth relation between Sri Lanka and China. It was there. So China very much was there. It is not that China is coming back now, which was very much there during the Maitripala Sirisena. Even Ranil Wickremesinghe was considered to be the close friend of India also. They have to engage with China. It has become inevitable for them. So the things are going to move in that direction certainly, and Sri Lanka-China relations will improve, and Indian government is also well aware of the fact that not just in Sri Lanka, the Chinese relation with Bangladesh, Nepal, Pakistan, also with the Indian Ocean region states, it is very much clear. So India cannot ignore that one, but India cannot also put pressure on Sri Lanka to disengage with China. That is not going to happen. Neither India is going to insist on that one. So, but the factor will remain to play an important role or trying to trigger some kind of tension between India and Sri Lanka.
Thank you, sir. Professor Yuan Goda is back with us. Sir, you want to continue with the domestic political system and the political issues that...
Yes, certainly.
Yes, please,
yes.
sir.
Yes, I'm sorry about that disturbance. I hope there won't be any more disturbances. But okay, let me conclude the last point. The last point I want to say that even the constitutional change will create a great deal of political uncertainty because of the fact that it requires a lot of negotiations. Even the governments, the government will have to find consensus within the ruling party to implement such radical constitutional changes. The 20th Amendment that has been unveiled is almost like a bombshell. I have a feeling that it has really shaken up the political establishment and political class in Sri Lanka. So it will take some time before we can have some clarity about how the government will handle this new situation created by this new constitutional bombshell. The second point is that, of course, government is very committed. The president particularly is very committed to, have a new constitution. But the constitutional reform process is a very complex one. That is why they have to go, through two stages. The first stage would be the abolition of the 19th Amendment to the 20th Amendment. And also the President Gotabaya Rajapaksa has committed himself to an entirely new constitution. An entirely new constitution requires not only a two-thirds majority of parliament, but also people's approval at the referendum, because the 1978 constitution is a relatively inflexible constitution. And it has certain clauses that requires, in addition to the two-thirds majority in parliament, the people's approval at a referendum. So those are things that are quite complicated in the changing political scenario in Sri Lanka, despite the fact that the government has got two-thirds majority. Just a month ago, the political situation can change quite dramatically. All right. The second point about the Tamil the politics and the 13th Amendment. So the government is in a way committed to either abolishing the 13th Amendment or revising it substantially in order to change the provincial council system. But I'm not sure that is, as easy as it has been stated by government spokesperson. As Dr. Kumar said that, the 13th Amendment, entails India-Sri Lanka relations, interstate relations. Without Indian government consent, I'm not sure whether any government in Colombo can unilaterally change the constitution to abolish the provincial council system. And if any government does it, it will also unsettle Sri Lanka's existing political equilibrium between the state and ethnic minorities. That can create quite a lot of problems. So there will have to be a tremendous degree of diplomatic negotiations between the government in Colombo and government in Delhi and also Chennai in order to reduce the powers of the 13th Amendment or other provincial councils by altering the 13th Amendment. So that's a fairly complicated issue. There's a very important second point that I would like to make in terms of ethnic relations in Sri Lanka. There seems to be a new strand of Tamil nationalism that advocates something like this. What the Tamils need after the ending of the civil war is now primarily economic development and developmental rights. The TNA, Tamil National Alliance, which has been representing Tamils in parliament, has been arguing for political rights first. But the new strand of Tamil nationalism is arguing for economic and developmental rights first. So this is a new argument that has been coming out from the Tamil political parties, and the people who advocate that line are also, with the government. So the government has managed to establish and promote a political line among Tamil political parties that challenges the Tamil National Alliance's conventional argument that devolution and political rights should take precedence over economic and development rights. Actually, that is the argument that the President Mahinda Rajapaksa's government made soon after they won the war in 2009. They said that the priority for the Tamil people should be economic development. Actually, they also at that time even coined the term that economic devolution should take precedence over political devolution. So there's a revival of that argument, not only in the Sinhalese polity, but also in the Tamil polity. So we can see a very interesting reconfiguration of ethnic politics in Sri Lanka in the coming years. So maybe I will stop there in response to the two questions that were put to me.
Yes, sir. Sir, following the same question here, again, the question is to you, sir. So, if the talks are there of revisiting to the 13th and the 19th Amendment of the Sri Lankan Constitution, so can we say these are the new policies and the new priorities for the new government? And do you see that happening anytime soon, or there are any other priorities? Because going back to the this issue of domestic economic crisis, so how is all these things playing role in Sri Lanka right now?
Yes, the 19th Amendment is the priority, not the 13th Amendment. I think the government is quite aware of the fact that dealing with the 13th Amendment is very complicated. It entails not only political issues within the country, domestic issues, but also relations with India. I think my feeling is that the government will not immediately take it up. But the 19th Amendment, yes. But still, the government will have to, at least from the president's point of view, it is very, very important for him to consolidate his position and also to acquire more powers to him, to the office of the president, than available under the 19th Amendment. Otherwise, if he continues to be, a president without powers, that will create a fairly problematic political disequilibrium in the relationship between the president, the prime minister, the cabinet, and parliament. So therefore, the dealing with the 19th Amendment is indeed a priority. And the other priority is, of course, the economic crisis. When the president came into power in November last year, Sri Lanka's economy is not as bad as what it is. Actually, the corona crisis, the totally unexpected situation. They may have had certain developmental plans that chalked out before the presidential election, but they are no longer valid. The central bank, the Minister of Finance, and the economic and planning bureaucracy, they will have to actually work out an entirely new plan in an extremely adversarial, domestic, regional, and global economic atmosphere. And that is a hugely challenging one. So I think the real problem in Sri Lanka is that, the excessive concentration of power that the president is seeking, will that help the government to deal with this, economic crisis, which is sharpening every day, every week, and every month. So I think my own feeling is that it will be a very, very complex and challenging, proposition for the government.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Kumar, taking discussion forward on the issue of Tamil Ilam, with reference to the Tamil Nadu politics and the changing political landscape in Sri Lanka, which is a move towards more nationalistic government. How do you see Tamil Ilam featuring in Tamil Nadu politics now?
Well, I think the Tamil issue has always dominated the Tamil Nadu politics for many decades. But in the recent time, we could see there is a gradual decline because of the vacuum created by the demise of the two stalwarts of Tamil Nadu, that is Jayalalitha and Karunanidhi. So the two leaders' demise has led to a vacuum in Tamil Nadu politics, one, and the Tamil political parties in Tamil Nadu itself are fractured enough. So that is second thing, that the Sri Lankan Tamil issue has not been taken on a drastic scale. Although time and again they have been raising that issues, and we could see Tamil Nadu, Tamil parties based in Tamil Nadu being very critical of Rajapakse brothers coming to power and all. But it has been not on a very high scale. And more importantly, the present central government, NDA government, doesn't depend upon the Tamil Nadu political parties for support for survival of their government. Of course, in Rajya Sabha, they might depend upon for passing certain bills, they might need the support of the Tamil political parties based in Tamil Nadu. Otherwise, there's not much pressure on that one. At the same time, with the military elimination of LTT also, as we could see that things have changed, and as Professor Jaidev Vengoda rightly pointed out, that the situation has changed and there is a move that the people want economic devolution rather than the political devolution. So this kind of development happening within Sri Lanka, and the Indian government also ready to engage with Mahinda Rajapaksa and all. So naturally the Tamil politics or the cry or the urge for any kind of revolution or any kind of anti-Sinhala politics may not happen on a larger scale, but nevertheless Tamil Nadu will continue to play an important role in determining India's policy towards Sri Lanka. Yeah, the point was that the Tamil Nadu will be an important factor in determining India's policy towards Sri Lanka. So that will be the factor. And at the same time, the Sri Lankan government priorities are different, not necessarily addressing the 13th Amendment or other issues at the present juncture.
Okay, thank you. My question to Professor Yuvan Goda, sir.
Yes.
Could you please throw some light on the political and the security issues that Sri Lanka is facing right now?
Well, on the security issue, I don't think Sri Lanka at the moment is facing any major challenge. You see, that Sri Lanka has, the last year, there were issues about this Easter Sunday attack. And I think the present government has rectified quite successfully many of the domestic security concerns that we have had during 2018 and 2019. You see, we must also not ignore the fact that President Rajapaksa led this election campaign late last year primarily on a plank of national security. So his government is committed primarily to restore national security capacity of the Sri Lankan state. And they are quite aware of the fact that that kind of a transition to a national security state, actually, which is now taking place in Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka state is no longer what it used to be until about 2-3 years ago. Sri Lanka is now rapidly making a transition towards being a national security state. That involves revamping and reforming quite a lot of security policies concerning domestic security, as well as security cooperation with, as Dr. Kumar said, with India, with China. We must also not forget that as India as well, India and Sri Lanka have a lot of similarities on this issue. During the corona pandemic, the state has emerged as, in India and Sri Lanka, we must not ignore these, parallels. The state's capacity for surveillance of citizens has, advanced enormously during the corona pandemic. And without people knowing that, the national security capacity of the state, even in other countries, and there. Once again, I must say that India and Sri Lanka are not exceptions. In almost every country in the world, the state's security capacity has advanced by leaps and bounds. So I don't think Sri Lanka is facing any major, security gap at the moment when it comes to national security. We have a very well advanced national security structure now in Sri Lanka in place under the new government. So that whether it's a plus point or negative point, I'm not going to make a value judgment on that. And Sri Lankan government is also quite smart, I must say, in restoring relations with India. Actually, as Dr. Kumar has very correctly pointed out in his presentation, you see, the Rajapaksa family, the brothers have learned from the electoral defeat in 2015 a number of very crucial lessons. I think one of the major lessons they have learned that during the last years of President Rajapaksa's government, that's in 2012, 13, 14, I think they overemphasize the relationship with China at the cost of the traditional relationship with India. And there was a perception in India that Sri Lanka under President Rajapaksa at that time moving towards China. It's a China Beijing centric foreign policy. And that everybody knows that Indian government was quite unhappy about it. And they had no secrets about that unhappiness. They actually openly expressed, the Indian government. The Prime Minister Modi sent his envoys to express their displeasure over the very close economic, political, military, and diplomatic relations with India, or rather with China. And the former President Rajapaksa and his family members have, I think, learned lessons from that negative experience, and they have restored relations with India, I think, quite dramatically. So my feeling is that the present government, as well as the previous government, any Sri Lankan government, whichever the party that constitutes the government, knows very well that both China and India are crucial for their economic and political survival. So, and the small countries also learn how to deal with big powers who have their own contradictions. And Sri Lankan foreign policy makers are, I think, very smart in exploiting the contradictions between India and Pakistan on one side and India and China on the other hand. So the small countries do it. The Nepal does it, Bangladesh does it, then the Maldives does it. So the only question that Sri Lanka's foreign policy at the moment will have to settle is Sri Lanka's relations under the new government with the United States. And that's an issue that they will have to deal with, I think, from the United States point of view, as far as I can say, that they have successfully managed to restore relations with this government. Earlier, during the previous Ranil Wickremesinghe government, there was a kind of a straining of relations between the President Mahinda Rajapaksa and his family and the US government. But they have been able to sort it out, and I have a feeling that Sri Lanka, under the present government, will have a very interesting, friendly, framework of relations with all the regional and global powers. And that is how I think the small states in the modern world will, behave in relation to, regional and global powers. So they have a very pragmatic foreign policy. I think my point is that it's not something very exceptional about the President or Prime Minister Rajapaksa. It's about any government in Colombo will have to adopt a pragmatic foreign policy towards regional as well as global powers, particularly in the context of changing domestic political dynamics. As Dr. Kumar also highlighted, you see the ethnic politics in Sri Lanka has changed quite a lot. You see the minority rights are no longer in the agenda of even Western so-called liberal democratic powers as it was 10 years ago. That the minorities are now perceived, that have been perceived, for the past 10 years or so, as a source of security threat. We know it, I'm sorry to say this, draw this parallel. Once again, India, Sri Lanka follows India in a variety of ways. Particularly the state-minority relations. I think that Sri Lanka is, following India's, the political strategies in dealing with domestic minorities.
Thank you, sir. Now we'll be taking questions from the audiences. We have questions here, and we'll start with questions. Sir, there is a question to Dr. Kumar. Sir, the similar interest of India and Sri Lanka are traditionally omnipresent, but how far is it possible because China has made Sri Lanka to be under its influence through their debt trap policy?
Yes.
Are you asking me?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So shall I repeat the question?
Basically, the traditional relations
With China, yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Yeah. Okay, so it's an important question. So already I've been emphasizing on that one, that the China factor will remain. See, the question of the debt trap diplomacy, which many of the Western countries have been criticizing China's BRI project. But as I said earlier, that the Sri Lankan government, or even Pakistan for that matter, or even the other countries which are been benefiting from the BRI projects, are arguing that the debts they owe to China is very less. So as I told you earlier, that the Sri Lankan Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa himself has stated in the interview that it is only 12% of the debt which they owe to Sri Lanka. And many of the other debt, as sir has rightly pointed out, they are in 83% of the GDPs in debt. So in that context, we cannot completely blame the China factor. But nevertheless, the Sri Lankan government also have to keep it in mind that to how long they can go along with China and how long they can be under the China's huge investment, which they are not able to pay back, then obviously they have to turn towards India. So in that context, I think the China factor will continue to play an important role, but they need huge investment. I think if a country like United States or a country like India and other country, when they invest, there will be a lot of conditions on various aspects, or even European countries investing in Sri Lanka, they'll talk about human rights issue, they'll talk about democracy, they'll talk about freedom for media. So various parameters or conditions will be there, even IMF and World Bank loan. When it comes to China, I think their kind of conditions may not be there. So that is the advantage with many countries. Smaller countries tend to go to China to get the large scale investment. I think somewhere down the line, they need to draw a line of how much money can be China and how much to be come from the Indian government. So that's where the traditional relations are there, but China factor also will remain. That is the India has to deal with, and Sri Lanka also has to deal with China and India, two major powers. So we could see the recent standoff and the border. I think Sri Lanka and many countries remain neutral over this, and so that will be the position. So China factor will remain to shape India and Sri Lanka bilateral ties.
Thank you, sir. Sir, there is a question from Professor Jaya Ramu to Professor Uyan Goda. Professor is asking, the triple crisis you referred to should lead to diversification of dependence of Sri Lankan government, but I see a heavy Chinese influence going by the economic assistance it is giving. How would you react to this?
Well, yes, actually, I was also going to make that point, the last point, because Sri Lanka needs, either foreign investment or foreign economic assistance. The China is the only reliable source of large-scale, foreign assistance in terms of investments and, loans and grants. So China doesn't give grants as such, only loans and investments. The India, if you compare India and China, Sri Lankans know that China is a much more robust source of investment and economic assistance than India. So India has a limited capacity compared with China in terms of assisting Sri Lanka in this very challenging times of economic reconstruction. And in terms of India-Sri Lanka relations, I must also make this point that there are certain sections in Sri Lankan society that are quite suspicious of India. I think we must also not ignore that. The business people feel threatened by Indian businesses, investments. So bureaucracy, if you talk to any Indian businessman working in Sri Lanka, would say that Sri Lankan bureaucracy has been quite, unsupportive. I know at least 3 communities in Sri Lanka that are quite skeptical or suspicious of very close relations with India. One is the first is the business community, because they feel threatened by the Indian businesses in Sri Lanka. The second is the professional community. They are also quite they feel threatened by the inflow of Indian professionals. Thirdly, the labor. So the influx of labor to Sri Lanka would generate a new wave of anti-Indian feelings in Sri Lanka. So one has to be very careful in handling these issues of what one may call insecurity because of a closer India-Sri Lanka relations. I think the governments in Colombo are quite aware of these things, because the governments in Colombo are under constant pressure from these constituencies, domestic constituencies, who have been advocating caution in terms of economic and other relations with, particularly with India. That a lot of people don't talk about these things in public, but we know that these are things that we discuss quite regularly in Colombo when we talk about India-Sri Lanka relations.
Thank you, sir. Sir, there is a question from Mr. K.V. Thomas to Dr. Kumar. Many diplomats and foreign policy experts in their analysis hold that the approach of new regime led by Mahinda Rajapaksa towards India would not be as cordial and encouraging because of the peer and the pressure group in Sri Lanka backing Rajapaksa. He has given an example. Even now, the protest for dissenting voice has come up against the Eastern Container Terminal jointly envisaged by India, Sri Lanka and Japan. Adding to this is the Chinese factor. Thus, to summarize the India-Sri Lanka relations on the basis of open, warm-hearted statements of leaders of both countries would be arousing. Your comments.
Yeah, thank you, and it's a very important and significant, very important question. Well, I think since Mahinda Rajapaksa has come back to power with 2/3 majority, and majority of his vote bank has been the Sinhala Buddhist chauvinism. So that has been the very much. So there is a lot of pressure on the East Terminal container coming through and other things. So that factor is always there, and that is the strength of the Mahinda Rajapaksa, because all the successive leaders you can see have been able to mobilize the pressure groups to play a very important role during the elections and other things. So there will be a pressure. Their argument is that it is a sellout for Indian government. Apart from this, there are various projects which they feel it is sellout to the Indian, to sell out to India. It is not the first time. Even in the earlier 80s and 90s also, as and when India tried to come up with a project and they tried to implement it, there is always a pressure resistant and anti-India feeling. For example, if the Tamil parties based in Sri Lanka, the Sri Lankan Tamil parties visit India and have a meeting with the Indian prime ministers or the other parties, there is always some kind of a euphoria or some kind of an anti-sentiment created within Sri Lankan this thing. So the pressure will be there. So it's one of the challenges for Mahinda Rajapaksa is how he is going to overcome the domestic pressure and continue to engage with India. Although the statements they have made, gestures they have made, that is important, that is there. But apart from this, the domestic pressure will continue to do economically. Economic how? Because the priority is to completely bring about economic changes, ensuring employment and other things. So in that context, there will be pressure from these chauvinistic groups. Although in the present Sri Lankan parliament, there is one Buddhist monk who has been become the member of the parliament. Although in 2004 there were 8 to 10 Buddhist monks who were part of the parliament through the Jati Kahele Orumaya. So now that one monk who is considered to be very radical, so there will be a pressure on the Sri Lankan government. And moreover, at the same time, we have to keep in mind that the Mahinda Rajapaksa is also planning or made a proposal of constituting the advisory council, who will be able to advise the government, and this advisory council will consist of the Buddhist monks. So this clearly indicates that how the nationalist policy is being pursued. So there will be a pressure on the Sri Lankan government to cater to the needs of the pressure, the vote bank, at the same time how they're going to deal with India. So that is what I'm saying. If both the countries try to compromise and negotiate, I think the East Container Terminal will come through and it will be beneficial for all the country. But one of the major challenge for the Mahinda Rajapaksa would be how to overcome the pressure from the Sinhala Buddhist chauvinistic forces. That is very important.
Yeah, thank you. We'll take one last question. Sir, the question is from Mr. Vinod MJ. Question is to Uwan Goda, sir, Professor Uwan Goda. Sir, do you think development aid could be used positively by India as a tool of diplomacy in building bridges with Sri Lanka?
Well, yes, certainly. I don't think India has really used this very effective instrument of interstate relations in the past effectively. I mean, that's one of the weaknesses in India's foreign policy towards Sri Lanka. You see, as Dr. Kumar very correctly pointed out, that China is very smart in its relations with not only Sri Lanka, with other small countries, South Asia, and also in Africa and other parts of the world. You know, the Western countries had this always economic and political conditionality in development assistance. And particularly, Mr. Rajapaksa, when he was in power, he intensely resisted Western, economic and political conditionality in development assistance, whereas he found it very comfortable to deal with the Chinese diplomats and Chinese government because there was no, overt conditionality. And he used to say that, whereas the Western diplomat will start talking, any discussion with him with a lecture on human rights, and the Chinese diplomats won't do that. So that, my point is that, the China, I think India also had, some kind of a, unstated conditionality in development assistance to Sri Lanka in the past because of India's interest in minority rights in Sri Lanka, because India has been backing the Tamil minority since the early 1980s. I think, as Dr. Kumar suggested, if the Indian government under Prime Minister Modi can de-link, economic assistance to Sri Lanka from the, domestic ethnic politics, I think India can find a greater space in terms of economic diplomacy with Sri Lanka. So that's a very good question. Really, I want to thank Dr. Thomas for that very insightful question.
I just want to make a comment, can I?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Please go on.
I just want to add one point for Sir, what Sir has already spoken. The thing is, India also has a problem when it comes to the development aid. In the recent times, we could see most of the development aid, we could see that it is going to Bhutan or it is being concentrated on Afghanistan and now Myanmar. So in South Asian region, the development aid to Sri Lanka is not very high, although the numbers may suggest, but the overall percentage of Sri Lanka's is very less. That is one. Second thing is, on the development aid, they have not been able to capitalize is because one is that the problem lies with India in the sense that most of the development projects which India has initiated or taken up has not been completed in time. So there are a lot of features in terms of completing that project, not just in Sri Lanka. If you see Bangladesh, if you see the Nepal and other countries, but if you see the China, how they have been completing the projects on time or a little bit delay. But in India's case, there is a lot of delay. Or even the taking up the railway projects or even Trincomalee plant and other things. So India takes its own time. There is complaint from many of the Sri Lankan friends and also from the South Asian countries that India has not been forthcoming. And it also, in terms of investment, India has its own limitations. Unlike China, which is huge capital, India doesn't have that one. So that is also one of the reasons why. So development project, India has not been able to capture. India has been doing in Northeast region. Now they're focusing on South, but more development aid can really transform the relation. As Uwan Goda rightly pointed out, delinking the ethnic issues, and going forward, I think Sri Lanka will not move towards China, but rather move towards India. But overall, I think the present situation gives an indication that both the ties are going to become strong.
Hello. 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 I think we have lost the connection with Dr. Kumar. Hello. Hello.
In your future. Thank you.
Okay. We
Yeah.
we can take one more question, and this question is anyone can answer, sir. It's question from Shweta Dhaliwal. I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing your name wrong. It's a question. India and Sri Lanka have several multilateral platforms that they share. How India-Sri Lanka relations have an effect on these platforms like SARC? Hello.
Uh,
Sir, you can answer, Professor Juan Goda, sir. Sir, you can answer.
I think, the SARC, I'm not sure whether it's an effective platform for Indo-Lanka relations any longer, unfortunately. The SARC is in actually in a state of crisis because a lot of South Asian countries now seem to prefer bilateral relations. Instead of uh, the failed project of regional cooperation. So I have a feeling that India, Sri Lanka will have to restore the people-to-people relations in a very big way. Uh, there have been people-to-people relations through SARC chambers of commerce, SARC, the legal, relations among lawyers and legal academics, and the university-to-university cooperation. I think that China has begun in a very, very big way that kind of collaboration and support for countries like Sri Lanka. Exactly what the Americans and the British and the French did in the past. Through the British Council, through the US Information Center and various other programs. The China is actually following the old masters in that game. I don't know to what extent India can do that, but India, I think, will need to strengthen those platforms and fora for people-to-people relations between India and Sri Lanka. That's, I think, one of the ways to address the suspicion and skepticism that many constituencies in Sri Lanka have towards India. That's very crucial and very important. Otherwise, even the closer economic relations would be looked at with suspicion by the business and professional communities in Sri Lanka. I'll give you one example. There were a lot of investment and participation by Indian advertising companies in Sri Lanka during the past 10 years. But in the Sri Lanka zone, in advertising companies are very, very worried about it. They are even, quite scared about the influx of Indian in advertising, public relations, and other companies. So those are the things India will have to really, look at, or rather look into.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Kumar, do you want to add here something?
No, I think it's okay. I think because I was about to answer it. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Professor and Dr. Kumar. I request Mr. Hormis Tarakan, Advisor, Center for Public Policy Research, to give his concluding remarks. Sir.
Thank you, Mr. Ghazi Hassan. Thank you, Professor Jayadeva Vyangoda. Thank you, Professor Kumar. It's been an extremely enlightening evening, and I must congratulate the CPPR for having managed to persuade these two experts to give us an exposition to Sri Lanka and relations between Sri Lanka and India in particular. I've always believed that it is important that we invite experts from our neighboring countries to talk to us about what their perceptions of the relations between our country and theirs is. And no one from India can. I mean, Professor Kumar is truly an expert in the field. But the perceptions which are there in the countries of our interest in our neighborhood need to be understood for us to react properly. It is from that point of view that I want to thank Professor Vyanguda, whom I've had occasion to admire for over several decades. And the perceptions and the explanations and the insights that he provided today to all of us were invaluable, to say the least. My thanks once again, Professor Vyanguda. Similarly, Professor Kumar, we have not met, but it was a very pleasant exposure that I had to the depth of knowledge that you have about Sri Lanka. And we are lucky to have had the pleasure of your company this evening, and we have really profited from what you had to tell us and your views on how India can, the steps that India could take profitably to improve its relations with Sri Lanka. At CPPR, we'll try, I'm sure, Dr. Dhanaraj and Dr. Hasan and their colleagues will do their best to compile the views expressed here today and make sure that they reach the appropriate levels in the country at the highest levels, so that notice can be taken of these very valuable suggestions which came up today. And I must also thank all those who asked very relevant questions, and some of those questions elicited very good answers. So it's very important that proper questions are asked, so that the brilliance that we have in our speakers is brought out to its best effect. So it's been a very enjoyable evening, a very enriching evening, and thank you all for this. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I thank Mr. Hormus Tharakan, sir, for his concluding remarks. Tharakan, sir, is former chief of RAW, I forgot to mention, and chief of Kerala Police, and is also advisor to Center for Public Policy Research. We have three centers: Center for Comparative Studies, Urban Studies, and Center for Strategic Studies. Sir is advisor to Center for Strategic Studies. With this, we come to the concluding session of this wonderful webinar. I would like to thank our distinguished speakers for taking time from their busy schedule and sharing with us their insights on a very important topic. I hope these discussions will lead to a larger debate and help in establishing a framework for India-Sri Lanka relations. I'm also thankful for all the participants for being such an engaging audience. We hope you keep coming back to our future events and the events of the CPPR. To know more about the work we do, please do check our website, cppr.in. CPPR is also active on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Telegram, LinkedIn. The handle we use is CPPR India. Catch the live updates of today's webinar as well as the photos on hashtag CPPR webinar. Once again, I thank you all for being here. Thank you so much.